One day, Albert Einstein was teaching. The students were eager, curious, waiting for another complex equation that would bend their minds. But that day, he didn't write a formula on the board. He simply looked at them and said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge." Now, this was not just a clever line, it was a doorway. You see, most people think Einstein was a man of the mind, but he was much more than that. He was a seeker, a scientist, yes, but also a mystic in disguise. Because anyone who stares into the fabric of the universe long enough starts to realize, the deeper you look, the more you begin to see yourself. In that classroom, Einstein wasn't teaching physics. He was teaching presence, teaching how to look beyond the surface of things, the atom, the equation, the speed of light. These were only excuses. The real lesson, to awaken wonder, he once said, the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. But mystery does not yield itself to logic. It opens only to those who are silent enough to listen and still enough to feel. In this world, we are drowning in information but starved for insight. We know how to split atoms, but not how to hold a peaceful mind. We've gone to the moon, but we haven't explored the silence within ourselves. Einstein knew this. He said, the intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. But today, we honor the servant and forget the gift. We think intelligence means answers, but true intelligence means knowing the limits of what you know and falling in love with what you don't. A student once asked him, "Professor, how do you come up with such ideas?" Einstein smiled and said, "I stopped thinking. That is the way." When the mind rests, knowing begins. When the ego drops, intelligence flowers. When you're no longer trying to conquer the universe, suddenly, you are one with it. So today, don't just admire Einstein for his genius. See him as a mirror. He was not pointing to the stars, he was pointing to the stillness inside you. Most people look at Albert Einstein and see a man of formulas, theories, and unthinkable intellect. But if you truly observe, he was not just a scientist, he was a seeker. He wasn't merely calculating the mechanics of the universe. He was longing to understand the essence of it. You don't question the nature of time and space unless you feel deeply that something greater is hidden behind what eyes can see and instruments can measure. Einstein's greatness did not lie in how much he knew, it lay in the depth of his wonder. The world called him a genius, but he himself said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious." This is not the attitude of someone who is trying to master the universe. This is the attitude of someone bowing before it. He was not intoxicated by knowledge. He was humbled by mystery. When you see a man spending his life studying light, not just its behavior, but its speed, its structure, its role in space and time, you realize he's not just trying to solve problems, he's trying to touch something infinite. He's trying to touch truth, not the kind found in textbooks, but the kind that sings in silence. If you truly listen, you'll see Einstein was not just talking about relativity. He was inviting us to question our own rigid sense of reality. He was not just breaking scientific models, he was cracking open the prison of perception. He once said, "The most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible." These are not the words of a man full of conclusions. These are the words of a man who stands in awe, like a child before a vast ocean. To seek like this is not about ambition, it is about surrender. When you see someone like Einstein, don't just measure his brain, observe his heart. Because in every true seeker, science ends where silence begins. One day, as Einstein stood before his students, chalk in hand, a young man raised his voice, not with disrespect, but with a kind of frustration. He asked, "Professor, if everything can be explained by science, what place is left for mystery, for meaning?" Einstein paused, not to think but to feel. He looked at the boy, not through him, not around him, but into him. And then he said something that stunned the room into silence. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and all science. You see, this was not the voice of a man trying to dominate the cosmos with intellect. This was the voice of someone listening to existence. For Einstein, teaching was never about transferring knowledge. It was about igniting a question, and not just any question, but the kind that burns quietly inside you until it transforms the very way you live. In that moment, he was not a scientist. He was a mirror reflecting back to the student a deeper yearning, not for answers but for awareness. People think teaching is about giving information, but true teaching is an invitation to look again, to see deeper, to unlearn. That day, Einstein didn't teach a concept. He created a space where learning could happen on its own. He understood something fundamental, that the universe is not just made of particles and waves, it is made of presence. And only one who is present can truly see. So when he taught, he wasn't trying to fill minds, he was trying to empty them. Only when the mind becomes light, like an empty sky, does the truth of the universe shine through. Einstein often said that he wasn't particularly talented, just passionately curious. But curiosity like his was not casual. It was consuming. It didn't come from a hunger for achievement. It came from a deep, almost childlike wonder, the kind of wonder that doesn't settle for second-hand answers or borrowed beliefs. This is what separates knowledge from knowing. Knowledge is gathered, picked up from books, teachers, theories. It fills the mind, but not necessarily the being. Knowing, on the other hand, is not something you possess. It is something you become. And Einstein, for all his scientific accolades, was not chasing knowledge for its own sake. He was searching for something more intimate, something alive. You can recite every law of physics and still not know the pulse of the universe. But when you become still, utterly still, a different kind of intelligence begins to function. Einstein may have spoken in the language of mathematics, but what moved him was not logic, it was silence. He would often sit for hours, not scribbling, not reading, just gazing, lost in the quiet dance of thought, dissolving into awareness. People marveled at his mind, but few understood that his true power came not from thinking, but from pausing between thoughts. That's where genius is born, not in the noise of the brain, but in the gap where the mind is no longer the master. That's where knowing rises, not as information, but as insight. This is why so many of his breakthroughs came not when he was trying, but when he was walking, daydreaming, resting, because truth is not forced, it is allowed. When you look at the great minds of history, you'll see this pattern again and again. The most profound realizations don't arrive with effort. They descend when effort ends. Einstein knew this, he lived it. And he taught, not by pouring in more data, but by reminding us that sometimes you must step out of knowledge to fall into knowing. A man once asked Einstein, "What drives you to think the way you do?" He didn't speak of textbooks or universities. He simply said, "I want to know God's thoughts. The rest are details." That is not the voice of a man limited to science. That is the sound of wonder. Einstein's brilliance did not arise because he had all the answers, but because he lived in deep intimacy with the unknown. He didn't run from the mysteries of life. He walked straight into them, arms open, heart surrendered. He was not obsessed with certainty. He was in love with the questions. The problem with most people is not that they don't know, it's that they stop wondering. The child in them dies, the spark fades, they trade awe for facts, aliveness for routine, but Einstein never made that trade. For him, curiosity was sacred. He once said, "The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing." That reason is simple. When you lose wonder, you lose life. Look at the stars, not with calculation, but with reverence. Look at a leaf, not as a specimen, but as a miracle. This was Einstein's way. His science was not a cold pursuit of answers. It was a passionate romance with existence itself. He looked at light and didn't just ask how fast it moves. He asked why it moves at all. He looked at time and didn't just measure it. He questioned whether it was even real. These are not the questions of a man confined to laboratories. These are the questions of a soul reaching beyond the veil of logic. This is the secret no one tells you. Wonder is not a childish emotion. It is the highest intelligence, because the moment you say, "I know," you stop growing. But when you say, "I do not know," your mind becomes vast, open, alive. Einstein lived in that space, and so can you, but you must dare to look, not with the eyes of a scholar, but with the eyes of a child who has just arrived in this universe, seeing everything for the first time? Einstein understood something profound about intelligence. It doesn't thrive in the soil of arrogance. True intelligence arises from humility, the recognition that there is always something greater than what we know. If we are to truly grasp the nature of reality, we must first admit that we do not know it all. That admission is the beginning of wisdom, and yet the world reveres the know-it-alls. People who have memorized the textbooks, who possess the perfect formula, who can deliver precise answers at the drop of a hat. But Einstein, the man who rewrote the laws of physics, was not impressed by the arrogant certainty of intellect. He was more interested in the vastness of the unknown. In fact, he once said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." It is easy to think that the more we know, the more powerful we become. But Einstein's life showed us that knowledge in excess can become a prison. The more you accumulate, the more the ego swells, and when the ego grows, the door to true intelligence closes. You become trapped in your own opinions, beliefs, and limitations. You can no longer see what is beyond your own perspective. Einstein never allowed himself to be trapped. Even as he solved some of the deepest mysteries of the universe, he remained grounded in humility. His intelligence didn't boast. It asked questions. It saw the limitations of its own understanding and embraced them, and that is where the real magic happened. His mind was open. This is the great lesson. Real intelligence is not in knowing it all, but in knowing how much you don't know. The ego says, "I know," but true intelligence says, "I wonder." When you let go of the need to be right, the universe opens up. You begin to see things in a completely new way. You stop trying to control reality, and instead, you start to experience it. Einstein knew that true greatness doesn't lie in the answers we can give. It lies in the questions we dare to ask and in the humility to admit that there is always more to learn. In this vast cosmos, no one can claim to have all the answers. But the more you surrender your ego, the more deeply you can tune into the mysteries that surround us. The path to wisdom is not paved with certainty. It is paved with openness, with the willingness to step into the unknown with no assurance of what you'll find. Einstein walked that path with grace, and so can we. Einstein's work was not confined to outer space alone. His true insight lay in understanding that the universe we measure with equations is only one part of a much larger reality. He understood that the vastness of the cosmos outside is a mere reflection of the vastness within. He once said, "Look deep into nature and then you will understand everything better." And yet, he was not talking about just observing the world through the lens of science. He was inviting us to look with the eyes of the heart, eyes that see beyond the surface, into the deeper patterns and connections that bind all life. The universe outside, with its galaxies and stars, is a mirror of the universe inside, the mind, the emotions, the spirit. When you study physics, you are learning how the particles and forces of the external world move and interact, but when you sit quietly, observing your own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, you are studying the same dynamics, but within. To truly understand the universe, you must not just look outward, you must look inward, because everything that happens in the vast cosmos outside is reflected in the microcosm of your inner being. Einstein's brilliance was in realizing this connection. He spent much of his life analyzing the relationships between energy and matter, time and space. But in his quiet moments, he also explored the deepest recesses of his own consciousness. It was not just about solving mathematical puzzles. It was about dissolving the barriers between himself and the world, between the observer and the observed. This is why he spoke of time, of light, and of gravity with such reverence. He didn't just seek answers to physical questions. He sought to understand how the very fabric of existence ties us all together. His equations didn't merely describe external phenomena. They revealed the interconnectedness of all things. The universe, whether within or without, is a grand symphony, and each of us is both a part of it and a witness to it. True awareness, Einstein realized, is not just about understanding the laws of physics. It's about understanding that those laws apply equally to the material world and the inner world. Just as you study the movement of the stars, you must also study the movement of your own thoughts. Just as you seek to understand the curvature of space-time, you must seek to understand the curvature of your own consciousness. Without this internal exploration, the external world remains a mystery that you can never truly know. And so, the greatest discovery is not in the formulas we derive, but in the awareness we cultivate. When you begin to recognize the interconnectedness of all things, when you realize that the universe is not something separate from you, but something that lives within you, you begin to see the world in a completely new light. You no longer live as an isolated individual. You become one with the whole, flowing with the rhythms of the cosmos, experiencing the truth that the entire universe is a reflection of your own inner being. Einstein understood this deeply. His work was not just about uncovering the mysteries of the physical world. It was about understanding that to understand the world, you must first understand yourself. The external universe is not different from the internal one. Both are infinite, boundless, and full of wonder, and when you realize that, the walls between the two begin to dissolve. In the end, Einstein's legacy is not just found in the formulas he crafted or the theories he developed. His true gift to humanity was his ability to see beyond the surface of things, to look deeper, to ask questions that led to new ways of thinking, new ways of feeling, and new ways of being. He was a man who understood that the most profound discoveries are not external, they are internal. The universe is not something to be controlled or conquered, it is something to be experienced, to be felt, to be lived in. Einstein's life reminds us that intelligence is not just about knowledge. It is about the humility to acknowledge the vastness of what we don't know. It is about wonder, awe, and a constant curiosity to explore the unknown, both within and beyond. True genius lies not in certainty, but in the ability to embrace the mystery of existence with open eyes and an open heart. So, as you stand in this world, surrounded by the endless questions of life, remember, it is not the answers you seek, but the depth of your curiosity that will lead you to the truth. Look beyond the physical. Look beyond the intellectual, and most importantly, look within. Because when you begin to explore the vast universe inside you, you will realize that the whole cosmos is alive within you. The search for answers is not about conquering the world outside. It is about discovering the world within. And that, perhaps, is the greatest truth of all.